the origin of life. We've talked about this before, and the origin of life. The nutrient soup theory, that the surface of the planet just cooked up, the amino acids, and they assembled themselves into life. It's in the history of cytology, of these knowledge, human knowledge about how cells work. This was possible to believe before the discovery of the electron microscope. But in light of what we know today, the simplest cell that exists looks about as simple as New York City. It has tens of thousands of parts. And so, what are the chances of such an entity assembling itself? No, not just assembling itself and having also a reproductive system that would be able to produce another exactly like it. It doesn't sound very feasible on the basis of what we see around us. If you see, a novel like War and Peace, you say, well, yes, it's conceivable that a typewriter, it could have fallen down a staircase and, written a word, and produced something like. But when you see a novel like War and Peace, you say, well, there must be a Tolstoy behind it somewhere. And similarly, in the natural world, the origin of life argues for something above it. There's a level of complexity that doesn't look like it could have assembled itself from less complex entities. It doesn't look like it at all. Rather, it looks like it was organized by something, and this is what we see, this is what our experience attests to in everything. When you see a fan, we say, well, there's got to be a factory somewhere that produced the fan. Something simpler than the fan didn't produce it. We see anything complex, we assume that something more complex produced it. We see a work of genius. We see, if one studies parasitology, the fantastically complex relations that different life forms have, synergistic or parasitical relationships, that they have, how they benefit from each other. The life cycle of certain microorganisms that are parasitical. One, for example, that I read of, it infects. The life cycle, it has to have these stages that it goes through in order for it to reproduce. It begins in the belly of a snail, and it affects the eyes of the snail, and so it brings about a blindness. And so the snail goes up on top of a leaf and looking around, trying to find the light, because this is what it was to want to do before the blindness assailed it. At which point, a certain species of bird must see the snail there, its bloodshot eyes, and go down and eat it, and carry it, and carry the microorganism elsewhere and drop it. These are all. It has to infect the snail. The snail has to go up. It has to be eaten by a certain bird, and it has to be carried over. And no matter how much you think, for many of the life cycles of parasitical animals, there's no way that you could cook up how the first time happened. It just doesn't work. And so these are some difficulties for the nutrient soup, cooking up these, the complex comes from something more complex. It's organized by something. If you see a work of genius, a work of artistry, then it comes from, and this is what we say, that had a designer. The design had a designer, and so it's not a. So there are many people a great deal smarter than me and a great deal smarter than you that have believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the belief in a supreme being is not irrational, and it's not absurd, and it's not illogical, and it's not unscientific. Scientific knowledge explains, it produces technically exploitable knowledge based on empirical data, that it finds in front of it. And faith is found in everything, all walks of our life, every place that we see faith. We go into a building on faith. We eat food at the supermarket on faith. We buy something from the butcher and eat it on faith. And sometimes it proves well-founded, sometimes it proves ill-founded. All of these things. We don't ask for proof. We don't say, has this particular piece of meat been analyzed, sent to a lab to prove that it doesn't contain salmonella? Rather, we infer that because why all of these things? Because it's useful to walk into buildings, it's useful to be able to buy a piece of meat and eat it without sending it to the lab first. It's useful to be able to trust other people when they inform something that some piece of news, some fact has happened in the world. All of these things. Similarly, religion has proved its value because it solves people's problems. It's effective, and it covers a wider explanation, and its horizons are broader than any other kind of explanation. And that's why it's the most powerful force for humanity, for collective human action that's ever been known and ever been ever been seen. And so, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also is something that many people arrive at without having it suggested to them. They find an urge to worship the Supreme Being within themselves.